Hi everyone, and welcome back to Vanished Memories, a channel dedicated to getting out lesser-known true crime and missing persons cases. My name is Brianna, and today I will be presenting to you the case of 56-year-old Anthony James Ward, who went missing from the Silverwood area of Fredericton in New Brunswick, Canada. If you are interested in this type of content, please do subscribe as I put out new videos every Wednesday. But before we get into this case, I do just want to give a brief trigger or content warning. Today, I will be discussing the topic of suicide, and it will be brought up multiple times throughout this case. So, viewer discretion is, of course, advised. So, as you can tell, this case is from Canada, so outside of the US. And normally the cases that I cover are from the US, so be aware that there's going to be a little less information about Anthony, or Tony as he liked to go by, in this video due to the fact that I don't have access to the US databases like I normally do. But nonetheless, I will do my best to discuss this case with you in as much detail as I can. Let's start with a little bit of information about Tony. Now, I wasn't able to find an exact date of birth, but we do know that he was 56 at the time that he went missing in 2015, so it's likely that he was born around the year of 1959. There only was a brief description of him, but I do know that at the time that he went missing, he was about 5'9", weighed approximately 175 pounds, and had brown eyes. Tony also had short graying hair at the time that he went missing, as well as a mustache. Tony grew up with 3 siblings, 1 sister, and 2 brothers. And as you'll be able to tell throughout this case, his sister Peggy seems to be the most involved when it comes to media coverage in his case. Peggy would describe that the siblings were very close and would say that Tony would confide in her and the other siblings about anything that was going on in his life. Peggy would go on to say, "We've been able to always talk about that with each other or reach out to each other, and whatever any of us needed, we were there for each other." Peggy would describe Tony as being kind, generous, thoughtful, and helpful to anyone and everyone. Tony was well liked by everyone, including his friends, family, and colleagues. At the time that Tony went missing, he was employed at Enbridge Gas, and he worked as an energy systems consultant. It seems that he did this job for quite a while before he had gone missing. But Tony also enjoyed doing the things that he loved, and a few of those things were traveling, cooking, and photography. So, given the fact that Tony was a very happy, upbeat guy, it was very concerning to his family when he disappeared seemingly without a trace. On the day of Friday, February 14th, it seemed as though it was a normal day for Tony. Tony's sister, Peggy, would say that he seemed like his normal upbeat self, and it seemed as though he followed his normal routine as usual. However, even though the day may have started as normal for Tony, his routine would change, as he actually wouldn't turn up for work that day. Now, this was so uncharacteristic of Tony that his coworkers actually began to be worried, and so they actually decided to go to his home, and when they realized that he and his car weren't there, they were the ones that filed a missing persons report. When Peggy had first heard that her brother had gone missing, she initially assumed that he actually had taken a very random, impromptu trip to somewhere in order to get away from the Canadian winter. After all, Tony did love to travel, and he had numerous upcoming trips planned, which included trips to Madagascar, Las Vegas, and China. So I don't know if what Peggy had believed Tony had done was something that he had done in the past, whether he had ever skipped out on work in order to go somewhere, but I do know that Peggy said that it would be very uncharacteristic for him to do that, but not let anyone know of his whereabouts. So Peggy soon also started to become concerned. After Tony would be reported as missing, an investigation would be launched in order to find him. However, a lot of information was garnered about what had happened leading up to his disappearance, but police and anyone else looking for him would unfortunately never be able to find Tony. So I'm about to tell you about the events that took place leading up to Tony's disappearance on that day. However, be aware that some of it is confirmed and some of it is not. I did find a lot of information from a Reddit thread where a Reddit user was stating that he actually was one of Tony's friends and so disclosed a lot of information about his case. But again, be aware that this is not 100% confirmed, though I did just want to mention it in here. So what we do know is that at some point, Tony would leave his residence in Silverwood. However, he would decide to leave his home without any of his electronics, whether that be his mobile phone or his laptop. so they were found in his apartment later on. According to the Reddit thread that I was referencing earlier, on the way out of his home, Tony actually had taped an envelope to his door. And in the envelope there was a letter as well as cash that was enough for the next 2 months of rent. In the note that Tony had attached to the door that day, allegedly it had said goodbye to his siblings and thanked them for being such a good family. Within this note, Tony apparently had also mentioned 3 friends that he wanted his siblings to contact to make them aware of the fact that he had left. And according to the Reddit user that I mentioned before, one of those friends was them. Now, this note is of course concerning, though it did not explicitly mention the fact that Tony had intentions of ending his life. However, Tony would allegedly write in this note, "Don't try to find me." What we do know is that after leaving the house that day, Tony would be seen in the Hill area of Fredericton, so about 10 to 15 minutes away from his residence at approximately 12 o'clock. Unfortunately, there's really not much information on where the sighting was exactly or who had seen him, but it seems as though this is in the official report that he was last known to be seen at 12 o'clock in that area. The next time Tony would be seen and his sighting would be confirmed was at 9:30 p.m., so about 10 hours after he initially was last seen. Now, at about 9:30, Tony would show up at an Armstrong convenience store. This store was located in Chipman, New Brunswick, which was about an hour away from where Tony resided. The owner of the convenience store, Barry Armstrong, would say that Tony seemed normal and had just purchased a coffee as well as some feet warmers. Tony would be wearing the following clothes during that time. He was wearing a light pair of shoes, described as possibly being loafers or hush puppies, as well as a winter jacket, possibly a North Face brand, and a light pair of pants. According to Barry, Tony didn't seem to be wearing anything heavy enough to indicate that Tony had any intentions of being outside for an extended period of time. So security cameras within the convenience store had recorded Tony's interaction, and he was seen talking and purchasing the goods from 2 cashiers in the store, and it seemed as though everything was going well. Unfortunately, this surveillance footage has never been released, but Barry, the owner of the Armstrong convenience store, says that he's not really sure why. However, I was able to find that it seems that the police were opting not to release this because of the pending investigation. However, it has been over 10 years now, so I'm not quite sure why it's not released yet. But I was able to find that the family of Tony had actually seen this footage and would also state that it seemed Tony was acting normal and was not doing anything or acting in a way that was out of the ordinary for him that day. So this is the last recorded sighting of Tony, and unfortunately it would be about another week before anything of Tony's would be found, and that would be his vehicle. So 6 days after Tony's disappearance, so on February 19th, his vehicle was actually located, and he had a 2010 Toyota Camry that was red in color. This vehicle was found in the Chipman United Church parking lot, which was only a minute's drive away from the Armstrong convenience store. Now, inside the vehicle, police would eventually release the information that they had found Tony's coffee that he had purchased from the convenience store only a few minutes earlier. And when they found it, it was about 3/4 full still, which does make sense considering the fact that where the car was located was about a minute's drive down the road. A local to the Chipman area actually would eventually talk to news outlets and state that she had realized Tony's car was in that spot since he had gone missing. According to her, there was a large snowstorm that occurred between the time that he went missing and the time that his car was discovered, and plow drivers had just decided to plow around his vehicle, not really thinking much of it. So it's of course very odd that Tony's car was there, and what's even more weird is the fact that Tony apparently had no connections to the Chipman area. Chipman was a very small area and only housed about 1,000 residents, and Tony apparently had no connections to anyone who lived there. Also, as we know, Chipman isn't that close to Tony's residence and is about an hour's drive away. Tony's car, as I mentioned, was found in that church parking lot, and according to the Reddit post that I've been mentioning, they say that that was actually one of the only places within the town of Chipman that there was no CCTV cameras. So basically, where Tony's car was found was essentially a dead zone in the area, so there was, of course, no footage. So now, this takes us to the aftermath of Tony's disappearance. Of course, as I mentioned, everyone was very concerned about Tony's disappearance, given the fact that it was so uncharacteristic. However, it seems as though it took the police quite a long time to organize a search, given the fact that the weather was very bad in the area where he had gone missing for a pretty extended period of time. Remember, this is Canada in the wintertime. The first search would not officially kick off until 2 months after Tony had disappeared in early April, and that search was coordinated by the Fredericton Police Department. In addition to the police department, the Neighborhood Action Team and York Sunbury Search and Rescue Team also were dispatched to look in the area where Tony was last seen and his car was found. Members of the search party concentrated a lot of their efforts to the bank of the Salmon River, which was the body of water that backed up to the property of the church. So in addition to the police dogs used, as well as the search team on foot, quadricopters were also used in order to get video and pictures of the shoreline. However, again, there really was no sign of Tony. In response to this, Tony's sister Peggy would actually be quoted as saying, "You know, I could say to you, a UFO sucked him off the planet, and that would make as much sense as anything that's happening right now." So even in the decades since Tony's disappearance, he has never been seen or heard from again. And now that we've talked about what happened on the day that he disappeared and following, let's talk about the theories in his case. The first theory that I'll mention is probably one that, as you've watched this video, you've kind of thought of yourself. And that is the theory that Tony had committed suicide and he took his own life that day. And there are definitely reasons why this theory makes sense, but I think there's also some reasons why this theory doesn't make full sense. The first reason that suicide seems one of the most plausible is, of course, the fact that Tony had allegedly left that note on his door that day. But again, that is fully alleged, and I've only been able to find that information from a Reddit post. In addition to that, this Reddit poster claims that what he had said was that he did not want to be found, but it doesn't necessarily state his intentions of harming himself or ending his life. But of course, for anyone who would be going through something like that and wanting to attempt to take their life, it does make sense for them to also tell their family not to find them if they know that it could possibly be traumatizing for their family member to see them in that state. Even though this alleged letter does exist and seems to kind of prove intentions of Tony wanting to harm himself in some way, the big question is, why would Tony want to do that? It seems as though he's never really been known to be anyone who's depressed or had suicidal thoughts in the past. And as I mentioned, his sister Peggy said that Tony would confide in her and the other siblings about pretty much anything going on in his life. However, that's of course not to say that maybe Tony didn't feel comfortable enough telling his family about how he felt. But when Peggy describes their relationship as uncharacteristically close, it really does beg the question why Tony would choose to end his life without first attempting to talk about his feelings or how he was feeling in some way with his family. So on top of the fact that it didn't seem as though Tony was depressed, I think one of the most interesting parts of this story is the fact that Tony's car was found an hour away from where he resided, which would be very uncommon for someone who had intentions of ending their life to do. A lot of times when someone is unfortunately feeling that way and wanting to end their life, they often will do it in a place that is familiar to them, so they have that one last little bit of comfort before they do that. So this type of behavior really would not be very common for someone who is depressed and wanting to take their life. So for Tony to have chosen to drive an hour away to an area that he seemingly had no ties to and had never been to before, it definitely seems a little bit odd. However, I think, again, this can kind of be refuted if we think about how Tony mentioned that he did not want to be found. Maybe he wanted to go far enough away where his family would not have been able to find him. Another thing that makes me less likely to believe this theory is the fact that Tony had several plans for travel coming up within the year. And if he had intentions of hurting himself, it seems odd that he would have made all those travel plans beforehand. However, we don't know how long ago he had made those plans, and of course things and emotions and feelings change, so he could have made them and then started to have suicidal thoughts that made him act on those desires. So again, I don't know how much I believe the suicide theory, but I do think that it has some grounds, even though there are some things to disprove it. But also remember, the note that I'm referencing is alleged and there's no confirmed proof of it existing. Another theory that seems to be pretty much disproven at this point is the foul play theory. And the theory basically is that Tony had left his home that night to go meet up with someone, and something happened to him as a result. However, I think that this is kind of unlikely, considering, again, if we believe that the note does exist that he left, he did say not to come find him, so he had intentions of leaving for a long period of time, and he left 2 months of rent, so I don't know why he did that if he knew that he would be coming back. Again, this theory doesn't really make that much sense, but I did just want to mention it since I've seen it kind of mentioned a couple times, but once again, it doesn't really make that much sense. But now we'll get into the last theory, and honestly, I kind of think that this theory holds the most ground, and this theory is that Tony had actually left deliberately. So the theory goes that Tony may have met someone prior to his disappearance, whether that someone was just a friend or someone he had feelings for and was romantically involved with, and due to meeting them had decided to basically run off with them. I know that this kind of sounds outlandish and unlikely, but bear with me because I kind of want to mention a few things that I think support the theory. So the first thing is, of course, the letter. He does not explicitly say that he has intentions of hurting himself in any way or ending his life, but he also does say that he does not want to be found. So if he did have intentions of going to meet someone and going to be with them and leaving his family behind, it kind of would make sense. So the first thing I think is worth mentioning to support the theory is the fact that he had left this alleged letter. Of course, this letter could be interpreted as a suicide note, but I think that considering the fact that he did not say he had intentions of harming himself or ending his life, it could also be interpreted as a note left to his family. Another thing that I think makes this theory more plausible is the fact that his phone and laptop were left behind. So, of course, if he did not want to be tracked, that again makes sense. According to the Reddit poster, the laptop was actually encrypted and unable to be opened and gotten into by his family. I'm not sure if the police had tried to get into this laptop, but according to the Reddit poster, Tony's sister Peggy was attempting to get this decrypted, but the last that the Reddit poster knew, it still hadn't been, and there was no information taken from the laptop or his phone. The last piece of evidence that I think kind of supports this theory is one of the biggest ones, and that's the fact that where Tony's car was found in that church parking lot was, as I mentioned before, a dead zone for cameras, and pretty much the only dead zone in the town. Now, of course, it could be coincidence that that was where he parked, but if he truly was meeting someone and did not want evidence of that, it could be possible for that someone or him or both of them together to have planned that area specifically to not leave any evidence. So, of course, with this theory, there definitely is some evidence to disprove it. And the first thing that I kind of thought of was the fact that, according to police, he had absolutely no ties to Chipman, but also remember his laptop and possibly his phone were encrypted, so I'm not sure how much information the police really could have gotten from those devices. Also, the other thing that I think kind of disproves this theory is the fact that Tony was very close with his family, so I'm not sure who he could have met that would have made him kind of want to completely uproot his life and leave his family and everything that he knew behind. Now, that's the end of the theories, but I'm kind of curious to know what theories you believe the most in this case, so if you can, please leave me a comment below because I'd love to hear what you think. So, Tony's case does unfortunately continue to be a mystery to this day. I actually was able to find that his case is currently inactive and was listed as such on November 23rd of 2015, pending any new information that could reopen his case. So if you or anyone you know has any information about Tony, please don't hesitate to reach out to the proper authorities, and I will have their information on screen as well as in the description box below as always. So this concludes the disappearance of Tony James Ward, who was last seen in the Chipman area of New Brunswick, Canada on February 13th of 2015. Thank you once again for tuning in to listen to Tony's case. Please do not hesitate to leave a like, comment, subscribe, or share this video. Again, my name is Brianna, and thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Vanished Memories. Bye!